Excellency, Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to Austria, Ambassador Ham, Excellency, Ambassador of the Republic of South Korea to Hungary, Dr. Hung, distinguished representatives as well from the Diplomatic Corps in Vienna, Professor and former EU Ambassador Michael Reiterer, Director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, Michael Zinkanel, Mr. Alexander Klimburg, Senior Fellow from the Institute for Advanced Studies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all this evening at tonight's conference at the Diplomatische Akademie, Vienna School of International Studies, to this conference, Cybersecurity and Cyberthreats, from Consultation to Action, the case of the EU and South Korea. Tonight's conference is organized by the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy and the Embassy of the Republic of Korea. I thank both for having chosen the venue of the Diplomatic Academy. We value very much our long cooperation with the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. We gather this evening as well to celebrate the launch of a new book on cybersecurity cooperation between the European Union and South Korea. The book is a product of a joint effort between experts from both regions who have come together to share their insights and experiences in this critical area. As we all know, cybersecurity is a growing concern around the world, with cyber threats becoming more sophisticated and more frequent. At the moment, we count one cyber attack every 11 seconds. I just remember the cyber attack on the Austrian Foreign Ministry beginning of 2020. Fortunately, after really intensive work and excellent cooperation between all the departments involved, the ministry managed to clean up the IT systems, to end the cyber attack, and to guarantee again the highest possible data security at the Foreign Ministry. In cybersecurity, cooperation between the departments, but also between friendly countries and regions, is vital to ensure the safety and security of our digital systems and to protect our citizens, our businesses and governments from cyber attacks. The European Union and South Korea have recognized the importance of cybersecurity cooperation and have been working together for many years to address common challenges and develop joint solutions. Before closing my remarks, I would like to inform you as well about our activities related to digital at the Diplomatic Academy. Cybersecurity and digital affairs in general are very high on the agenda of the Diplomatic Academy. We will start a brand new 2-year master program in digital international affairs in September this year in cooperation with the University of Innsbruck. We organize regularly conferences related to digital topics. So, for example, only yesterday, a high-level lecture on the EU's digital alliance with Latin America and the Caribbean took place here at our Diplomatic Academy. And last but not least, we offer also tailor-made executive training seminars on tech diplomacy. I would like to thank all of you for being here today and hope that the conference this evening will inspire us, and also all those joining as well via our live stream for further collaboration in this field. And now I will pass the floor to the director of the Austrian Institute. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very welcoming remarks, Deputy Director Schubert. Distinguished Excellencies, honorable diplomatic representatives, representatives from various Austrian ministries, dear colleagues, esteemed students, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's discussion. I'm very honored and pleased to welcome all of you to this very timely topic, very relevant topic that we are going to cover today. In his foreword to the book that we would also like to refer to today, Cybersecurity Policy in the EU and South Korea from Consultation to Action, the former president of the European Council wrote a foreword, Herman van Rompuy, and he referred in this foreword to the former president of the European Commission, Juncker, and quoted him during his State of the Union address in 2017 with the following words: "Cyberattacks can become more dangerous to the stability of democracies than guns and tanks." And within the last 6 years, we have seen that this development has been increasingly important, that these words of warning have become more relevant than ever before. In particular, when we take a look at the trends and the analysis of cyber threats and hybrid threats that show one very distinguished commonality, and that is that the scale and the intensity of cyber threats, of cyber attacks, is constantly increasing. And if we look past in the last couple of years, of course, we have seen these recent examples during the COVID-19 pandemic, where through disinformation campaigns, through cybersecurity and cyber attacks, the democracies of the European Union, but all around the world, were also threatened. But we have also seen that more recently in the Russian war against Ukraine, where we can definitely identify a synchronization of hybrid and cyber attacks with the military advancements on the ground since 2014, but in particular, of course, intensified since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of last year. And for these aggressors, like Russia, but also like North Korea, cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns have become new weapons in the arsenal of warfare. And therefore, new security challenges arise to democracies around the world, to the European Union, to its member states, but also to South Korea. And therefore, it's my great pleasure that I'd like to thank first and foremost the Embassy of South Korea here in Austria and the Diplomatic Academy for hosting us. Before I go into the details to present to all of you our distinguished speakers, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Song Wook-ham, the ambassador of the Republic of South Korea to Austria. Previously, he served also as Deputy Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in South Korea, and ambassador and deputy representative for the Korean mission at the UN. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much for organizing today's event. Mr. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to join you here today at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna to discuss cybersecurity policy in the Republic of Korea and the European Union. I would like to begin by thanking Director Briggs and Deputy Director Schubert for kind invitation. Let me also congratulate Michael Reiterer, the former EU ambassador to the Republic of Korea, on the recent publication. The new book, Cybersecurity Policy in the EU and South Korea, From Consultation to Action, is a significant contribution to an increasingly important field. We are currently witnessing a transformation in the way we live and work, which has been fittingly called the fourth industrial revolution. The enormous advancement of technology has brought us unprecedented economic and social benefits. Digital data has become more open and accessible than ever. And the introduction of new technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and quantum computing opens new possibilities for all of us. But progress comes at a price. As the digital transformation accelerates, so too are cyber threats on the rise. Cyber attacks know no borders, neither do they distinguish between traditional public-private boundaries. threatening critical national infrastructure and ordinary citizens alike. These threats need to be identified and addressed together if we are to reap the full benefits of this fourth industrial revolution. However, we are not only at a turning point of technological progress, but also in the middle of a major geopolitical shift in which hybrid threats play a growing role. The year 2022 was marked by an attack both on the sovereignty of a nation and on the very foundations of the rules-based international order. The Russian invasion of Ukraine shows us how old and new threats, tanks and cyber warfare, can be combined to raise the stakes of and extend conflict beyond traditional boundaries. Friends and colleagues, I'd like to emphasize the particularly important and grave cyber threats posed by North Korea. With its economy hardly able to satisfy basic human needs of its people, North Korea has turned to state-sponsored cybercrime. We are especially concerned about increasing cases of cryptocurrency theft and the use of cryptocurrencies to launder illegal proceeds of crime. Even more troubling is that the North Korean regime's malicious cyber activities are often mobilized for the purpose of evading UN Security Council sanctions and financing the illegal development of weapons of mass destruction, seriously threatening international peace and security. Malicious cyber activities have become a lucrative way for North Korea to support its regime, circumvent UN Security Council sanctions resolutions, and finance its WMD programs. Since 2017, North Korea has obtained over $1.2 billion worth of cryptocurrency through illicit online activities, with over half of that amount amassed in the last year alone. Revenue from illicit cyber activities provides 30% of the funding for its missile development program. The North Korean case vividly illustrates that cyber threats are a global issue that requires a comprehensive solution. Illicit cyber activities need to be countered decisively to ensure that cyberspace benefits our society by remaining secure, safe, open, and most importantly, free. In response to these challenges, the Republic of Korea has developed better, more comprehensive cybersecurity policies over the last 3 decades to ensure our ability to prepare, respond, and recover. In addition to strengthening domestic capabilities, Korea has a two-pronged international approach. First, to further strengthen bilateral cooperation with like-minded countries. And second, to lead multilateral discussions on cyber norms. The EU is a key partner in both of these endeavors. We share the common goal of ensuring an open cyberspace, and we face similar threats. Since 2014, ROK EU cyber policy consultations have been held. This bilateral format has provided an opportunity to share cybersecurity policy and threat assessment and discuss ways to strengthen cooperation on cyber capacity building, the application of international law, and responses to cybercrime, to name a few. The Republic of Korea supports the central role of the United Nations when it comes to developing a rules-based international framework for cybersecurity. One of the most important venues for shaping cyber diplomacy in the coming years will be the UN First Committee Open-Ended Working Group, which represents an opportunity to develop an approach to state behavior in cyberspace based on multi-stakeholder governance, capacity building, and democratic norms. UN efforts to develop a rules-based international framework for cybersecurity require special endeavors by countries who firmly believe that cyberspace needs to be open, free, and safe. Korea and the EU could take the lead and provide a model for other states to follow. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize the importance of cybersecurity policy in today's digital world. The Republic of Korea and the EU have made significant strides toward developing effective policies to address cyber threats. Cooperation can ensure that international standards are established and best practices are shared, creating a safer and more secure digital environment for all. I hope that today's discussion will serve as a valuable opportunity to the ongoing efforts to strengthen the cybersecurity policies in the Republic of Korea, in the EU, and worldwide. I thank you very much.
Ambassador Ham, thank you very much for your introductory remarks and for this keynote speech that brings us directly into the topic of tonight's discussion. Especially thank you for emphasizing that South Korea and the EU could play a significant role as a model to enhance cybersecurity globally. I will now like to introduce to all of you our distinguished panelists of tonight in their order of appearance. First of all, to my right, Ambassador and distinguished Professor Michael Reiterer. Previously, Michael Reiterer has served as the ambassador of the European Union to South Korea and has been deputy head of mission at the EU delegation to Japan. Currently, he is a distinguished professor at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy at the Brussels School of Governance, and also an editor and contributor to our book that I also had the pleasure of writing one of the chapters, Cybersecurity Policy in the EU and South Korea. Thank you very much for being with us. Then, in the middle, we have Ambassador Ki Dog-hong. He is currently the ambassador from South Korea to Hungary. Thank you very much for making the way from Budapest to Vienna. He is also professor at the Department for International Relations and Political Science at the Seokmyung Women's University, and previously served as the Deputy Minister for Defense Reform at the Ministry of National Defense. He also contributed to our book and wrote the chapter South Korea, Cyber Defense and Digital Cooperation with the EU. And then we also have Dr. Alexander Klimburg. He is a well-known writer and advisor on cybersecurity and cybersecurity policy. Previously served as the head of the Center for Cybersecurity at the World Economic Forum, and previously has been the director for Cyber Policy and Resilience Program at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. Currently, he is affiliated with the Vienna-based Institute for Advanced Studies and also with our own institute, the AIS. And in 2013, he was invited to present the EU cybersecurity policy to South Korea, so also you have a very direct link, cybersecurity policy from the European perspective, also into South Korea. We will hear two presentations from Ambassador Reiterer and Ambassador Song, and then Alex Klimburg will comment on these two sections. And then I'd like to go immediately into the discussion, so I'd like also to you, the audience, to engage in a vivid discussion on the topics that we will hear. But first of all, I'd like, again, to present Michael Reiterer and to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a few words about the book, as I'm a co-editor. It was quite interesting if I look at the three contributors here. The professor, after having written in the book, became ambassador. The deputy director, after having contributed to the book, became director of the institute. The ambassador, having written in the book, turned into a professor. So figure out what the career is. But it's quite interesting. And it all started in 2018 when I was invited at the University of Korea to give a speech about the EU cyber diplomacy. As an ambassador, you know that you get all kinds of requests to talk about something. So I had to make it up. And then we had very interesting discussion at the university, and we thought, well, we will continue the discussion, and the result is the book. It's also nice to present the book at a time when there are celebrations. Well, if you work for the European Union, you are already happy if there's a 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the EU and Korea. If you were to work for Austria, then you figure out you have quite few more years. Also, I have seen a little trick in this celebration, because the Republic, I learned, started in 1918, so you have to add a little bit the empire to come to that celebration, but I think it's always nice if there is a celebration. Well, I will not go into too many details, but just to recall what are we talking about? Cybersecurity threats, and these are the main, I would say, threats which we have to meet. And if we look back a little bit into the history of the European Union, but also of member countries, there was a development. At the beginning, cyber threat equals a problem with the internet. My personal account is hacked. I have to pay with my Visa card, and I have a problem. That was the beginning. But compared to the threat scenarios which we have today, that was nothing. And I think this is a development which we have seen in 2007, when there was the big attack on the Baltic states, and then there was another moment of truth, I would say, with the revelations of Snowden. So that all changed the games, and I think we have become more concerned. And everybody is concerned. These are the figures of the last 15 years, and you see it from public administration to the general public services, health, and that's what we normally call critical infrastructure, which we have to protect. And I think there we figured out very quickly that we share many interests between the European Union and the Republic of Korea. The digital economy. Korea is probably the most connected country in the world, and it developed with an incredible speed. A few years ago, hardly anybody was on the internet, and now everybody's on the internet, and everybody is really connected. That increases vulnerability, and that opens the country more for cyber threats, and therefore we need to cooperate to come up with a rules-based system. So in the bilateral relationship, it's part now of the strategic partnership, and the European Union has produced quite a few security-related documents, and the most important one is the Strategic Compass, which is the security doctrine of the European Union, and there you see very clearly the reference: the cyberattacks, critical infrastructure, ransomware, EU cyber diplomacy, toolbox, preventive measures, and it is spelled out very clearly that we need to cooperate, especially with the countries in the Indo-Pacific. And therefore, if we look in the EU Indo-Pacific strategy, we find references to cyber all over the place, with cybercrime, security and defense, promotion of digital governance, open trade, cross-border flows, and protecting the rule of law, human rights and fundamental freedoms in cyberspace, which is this value-based approach, which divides the world a little bit, especially when we look at the United Nations, where we basically have two blocks: the one which is for the multi-stakeholder approach, and the other one which would like to have a new treaty regulating the cyber sphere. And regulating cyber sphere would mean control. And I think these are the two big differences which we see. The European Union has built up knowledge and expertise slowly. In 2013, there was the first cyber strategy, and with the Council conclusions, the new cybersecurity of 2020 underlines the need for resilience, technological sovereignty and leadership, operational capacity, and advancing in global and open cyberspace through increased cooperation. And I think especially the later one is the important one. And I have concentrated in my chapter in the book on cyber diplomacy, because there is hardly any area where diplomacy is more in need than in cyber, because what is the border? Where are the borders of cyber? So you need cooperation, and I think that's the best example you probably could find. Therefore, we have the EU cyber diplomacy toolbox, which I have analyzed a little bit, that you come very clearly to three functions, I think: supporting externally the relevant internal EU policies, providing protection for citizens, for companies, but also offensive tools if you are attacked. And the European Union has also passed a law and actually implemented it to have sanctions against entities which could be identified as aggressors. And that's very difficult in the cybersphere to figure out who is actually the one who attacked you, because otherwise you cannot reply. So this is, I think, the importance of the cyber diplomacy toolbox of the European Union, where we have also figured out that in talks with Korea, this is where Korea would like to cooperate with the European Union to come to a governance system and to have sanctions together, a multilateral system to have sanctions. Because if you know where the aggressor comes from, if it is China, if it is North Korea, especially against China or Russia, you might be doubtful whether as one country you want to respond. But if you have a multilateral approach, then it would be more effective, and you don't stick out, and you are not open to countermeasures as easily as if you were alone. So the European Union, I think, is working on that. Working on that means the member states at the end of the day have to implement it. We have to do it in the multilateral way, because the cyber is the interface actually in all domains of our life: economy, technology, national security, business interest, competitiveness. It's all about the same issues. I have identified a few areas where actually cooperation is possible: data protection, emerging technologies, enhancing resilience, norm buildings, cyber conflict prevention, security and safety, and I have already mentioned the cyber sanctions. It is important to exchange and gather information together in order to be prepared for cyber attacks. The military dimension is getting more and more important. We didn't know that for quite some time in Europe, but how did the war in the aggression against Ukraine start? With an all-out cyber attack. And I think that has driven the message home to everybody. In honor of our colleague, the Budapest Convention is very, very important. I was permanently pushing Korea to sign up to the Budapest Convention. Still hope that it will come soon. I think there's readiness to do it, and there is the need to cooperate with the private sector, because in that area, without the cooperation of the big companies, the big tech companies, there is no chance for solutions. I just gave 3 examples that the things which I have mentioned which could be done, 3 of them are actually implemented, which is important because, and that's my experience now as 40 years of diplomacy, which I have finished 2 years ago, we are very good in dialogues, we are very good in writing nice declarations, we are very good in shoulder patting each other, but sometimes it is very difficult to move from concepts to projects, from consultation to action, and I hope the book is a tiny little contribution to make this transition from consultation to action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Reiterer, for your insights, not only into the book itself, but also into presenting various EU initiatives and also potential cooperation aspects of South Korea and the European Union. I'd like to ask now Alexander Klimburg to comment briefly on the remarks from Ambassador Reiterer from the perspective of your expertise. Alex, thank you very much.
So thank you. Thanks again for the invitation to be here. It's great to be part of this, and as I'm sure the audience noticed, I'm the odd man out here, not only because I'm not an ambassador, but I am also not an author of the book. So my role today will be simply as a commentator or rapporteur of the previous comments, which of course gives me an impossible job to do, as Ambassador Reiter covered the entirety of European cyber in his presentation. So I'll do my very best to add on where I can. And a couple of comments I think might be helpful to especially the students here, but also those looking more at the current affairs. First of all, one thing to keep an open mind about is PESCO, which some of you, of course, will be familiar with. This is an alternative form of structured military cooperation in Europe, and which has activated their cyber rapid reaction teams to support the Ukraine recently. Now, PESCO does not include all EU member states. That's the whole point of a structured cooperation. In fact, it's a rather small team, but this already gives you an idea of what EU cooperation actually looks like, which is a number of technical specialists actually supporting each other in case of need. And most of you, of course, will be aware in the European Union, there are two different ways that we can provide assistance by a treaty. Of course, one of them is 222, the Treaty of European Union, which is the Mutual Assistance Clause, which is Solidarity Clause, which is for a natural disaster or a man-made disaster. A cyber attack can be a man-made disaster. Or, of course, the Solidarity Clause, which comes into play for armed attack. So those who think Austria is neutral and not part of this it's not accurate on two accounts, I have to say. So this shows, keep in mind, there is actually support being delivered to the Ukraine in the sense of technical specialists, and this support, of course, is also available to EU member states, and there are many similar programs that exist. The cyber toolbox, diplomatic toolbox, was mentioned. This is a very interesting tool that was developed in 2017 under the Dutch presidency, which I supported at the time, and the rationale was to leverage Europe's major power, which is of course economic, in this new burgeoning hybrid war confrontation. And that provided the EU member states with the pathway towards providing sanctions against individual entities, not countries. I think it's important to point out that there's no political attribution done against states in this toolbox, which is quite difficult. At the same time, because it plays within international law, those of you who correctly point out, for instance, attribution is very difficult in cyberspace. In international law, the burden of evidence, standard of evidence is quite low. So it's not the same as in a normal civil case or criminal case. And therefore, we don't actually need to have a smoking gun to be able to enact certain activities in international law. Having said that, the cyber diplomatic toolbox is now being extended as part of the strategic compass, and one of the major components being discussed right now is looking how to advance the threat intelligence sharing between the private sector and the member states. This is a major challenge because national security issues are still dealt with very delicately within European governments, and also some of the companies have not been too forthcoming with some of their information that they would rather sell. However, the next edition of the toolbox is likely going to provide an indicator of where Europe is going with this, and Europe has used this toolbox quite often already. So there's been over 40 individuals and companies that have been sanctioned over the years, and indeed were sanctioned also as part of the attack on the Ukraine. I have a bunch of other comments, but I think we can save that until later. I would say just very briefly on the question of norms that were just addressed before. It's very important to point out that we are now in a new playing field in international diplomacy, where between the standard practice of trying to proceed to a treaty, we also have the focus on soft law, and that's when you hear norms, that's of course what we're referring to, soft law and political agreements rather than legally binding agreements. And within the norm discussion that has been particularly poignant in the UN First Committee and the UN Group of Governmental Experts and Open-Ended Working Group. The rationale has been to seek agreement on rules of the road of behavior in cyberspace. So for instance, within the UNGGE, we have the 11 defined norms of peacetime behavior for states. And this is peacetime behavior because in wartime, we have standards. We have international humanitarian law, and the position of the like-minded group, i.e. the liberal democracies, is that we don't want to change that. So I want to leave it at that, and I'm sure we'll get to that on questions, but thanks for giving me the opportunity to comment.
And thank you very much for doing that so professionally. We will get back to you, Alexander, after we hear also the very brief presentation from Ambassador Hong. Ambassador Hong will also reflect in his input the topic, the chapter of his book, South Korea's cyber defense and the possibilities of cooperation with the EU, but also you will focus in your presentation on cyber threats from the South Korean point of view, of course originating first and foremost from North Korea, where I believe, if I remember correctly, over 7,000 cyber warriors have already been identified. So thank you very much also, Ambassador Hong, for your presentation.
Michael, may I take a stand?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm very honored to be here. Actually, today is my 100th day to become after being ambassador to Hungary. So it's very much a special day for me. And then, let me first congratulate on the publication of the book edited by His Excellency Michael Reiter and his colleagues. I'm very honored to contribute a chapter on North Korea cyber threat. My chapter deals with how the EU and South Korea have helped each other to manage the crisis and suggesting several policy recommendations. The Republic of Korea appreciates the EU since it has been instrumental to provide us with a guideline, vision, and framework during the past 6 years while Professor Reiter was serving as an EU ambassador to South Korea. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to thank him for his outstanding contributions. We could have not built a strong partnership with the EU without his devotion, passion, and sacrifices. If I briefly introduce my chapter on his book, Reconnaissance General Bureau, 정찰총국, has been the major engine behind North Korea's increasing cyber offensive activities. I include an organizational map with their specific roles and missions of subordinate branch offices under Bureau 121. My key point is that we should not overlook the threat of its cyber capabilities. We are always occupied with the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons and the upcoming 7th nuclear test because headlines are always grabbing those issues and taking our attention away. It is worth mentioning that Republic of Korea became the full member of NATO CCD-COE in May 2022 and also participated in the Rock Shields exercise, which held during the April 18 through 21, 2023. This year, more than 60 members of the 11 ROC stakeholders, it includes civilian as well as military and intelligence institutions, joined the exercise, and they were benefited greatly to learn how to cooperate with strategic partners of the EU and NATO in dealing with potential threat actors. I must say that the Yoon Suk-yeol government has made it clear that it will commit itself to widen its horizon by sharing information and enhancing its network with strategic partners. Despite strong warnings by EU, NATO, UN, and the US-ROC alliance, North Korea is still expanding its hacking units to develop cyber capabilities. Its cyber units, especially Bureau 121, are assumed to possess sophisticated cyber espionage capabilities, operating system, and intrusion software. They established Bureau 325, and this proves that they are expanding their cyber offensive activities even further. RGB, 경찰청국, produced systematically its hackers. It is well known that they scouted young, talented boys from the early ages and trained years at the best schools and sent them overseas as IT workers for engaging in cyber espionage. They created highly disruptive malware deliverable online to network computers and successfully designed standalone system autonomous of the internet. Therefore, we need to constant vigilance and upgrade our preventive measures. Cyber defense cooperation must be coordinated at the regional level with like-minded countries not only in the EU, but also in ASEAN, and Latin Americas for sharing information about new malware, attack methodologies, target emphasis, or other useful information about hostile cyber agencies. After SolarWinds intrusion caused a huge shock to the US and elsewhere in 2020, LAC found it necessary to work closely with like-minded countries, mostly from EU, in joining CRI, that is International Counter-Ransom Initiative on October 2021. The Republic of Korea understands clearly the necessity of cooperating with the civilian sector. For 윤석열 government, 2022 became the milestone year for South Korea for upgrading its own capabilities. By the time of October 2022, the 윤석열 government clearly realized the urgency and decided to revamp the organizational process and strengthening the control tower by appointing the presidential secretary to deal with the cyber threat. Again, South Korea was greatly benefited to associate with ICRTF, that is International Counter-Ransom Task Force initiated by Australia, and earned valuable insights from activities of RCDC, which is Regional Cyber Defense Center in Lithuania. It also learned more about concepts of offensive defense, defend forward, and hunt forward operation. It was an eye-opening experience to identify new tactics and techniques by analyzing potential threat actors, including North Korea. International cooperation on detecting, protecting, and responding to North Korean cyber operation has been constrained by varying threat perceptions and interests. China and Russia, for example, have consistently denied providing a haven for North Korean hacker groups. That is why we made a joint démarche with 7 like-minded countries to stop these illicit cyber activities on April 4th, 2023, and Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul also made a joint announcement to fight against Pyongyang's cyber offensive on April 8, 2023. North Korean hacker groups have been geographically dispersed in China, Russia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and even in Europe. Acting independently or mutually supporting each other based on their specific cyber espionage and information manipulation, which include APT-37, Kimsuki, and Sun-Team, and ransomware and financial extortion like APT-38, Andriel, 2 various disrupt and destructive cyber operations like Lazarus Group. So at the same time, Pyongyang has been able to protect its critical infrastructure from potential reprisal, limiting its online access, dependencies, and network vulnerabilities by relying on China and Russia's network. So many of North Koreans' IT workers are still hired by remote IT service sectors in various countries. They are engaged in hacking with a fake identity to create proxy accounts and withdraw cash illegally from client companies. The amount of cash is enormous. It is known to have swindled more than $1 billion in virtual currency from blockchain companies around the world and used it to support for testing missiles and developing ICBMs and other types of WMDs. It is a clear violation of relevant UN Security Council resolution. According to UNSCR 2397, each member state has to repatriate all DPRK overseas workers by December 2019. However, they are still working without valid permits on students or tourist visas to bypass local authorities' surveillance. Therefore, the ROC government has agreed upon with the United States to jointly deter and efficiently respond toward the increasing cyber threat. The mission requires a high level of interoperability over multiple domains. It also needs to deploy for using a multiple set of tools if we surely want to hunting the prey. So throughout the partnership with the EU and the United States, we need to test new methodologies, including buffer overflow, privilege escalation. As the ambassador mentioned, the toolkit and redirection, triggering, exfiltration, social engineering, persistent attacks, man-in-the-middle attack, distributed denial of services, and obfuscation. So the targets also can include workstations, servers, data networks, voice networks, wireless networks, websites, database, space networks, battlefield networks, and industrial systems. So I would like to conclude my remarks with saying that we need to encourage more close coordination among partners, experts, and security planners. We strongly hope that we still be able to operate in network searching, finding, and removing threat actors' capabilities in our own network. I must stop here. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hung. Again, Alexander Klimburg, please, your 2 cents. I know it's a difficult job, but I'm also aware that we have probably picked the most distinguished and experienced cyber expert on that topic as well, so please.
Thank you. I'm privileged also not to have any responsibility, so I can say whatever I like. But also as a hacker, I can tell you a little bit more about the technical background of some of what we just heard, which I would urge all of you to review in depth because it was very interesting and very instructive, and also not only on a technical level, but also showed how far the Republic of Korea has come in its also joining the like-minded group in attribution. So I will take a minute more than I had planned because I think it's worth it. First of all, on the technical side, all of you, of course, are familiar with ransomware. You might not be aware that the first ransomware attacks actually came out of the so-called Lazarus Group or North Korean affiliated actors, probably operating from China. And that was that what we saw was the Eternal Blue malware suit that was stolen from the US government, most likely by Russian actors, was used by North Korean actors in China to steal Bitcoin from Chinese actors, which is usually a no-no. And that was quite remarkable. And then it suddenly disappeared, and then it came right back, and then we had WannaCry. And WannaCry was the first major use of this type of attack on a global scale, which of course also hit, for instance, in the UK, the National Health Service was directly responsible for fatalities and major disruption. But it was nothing compared to what happened afterwards, which of course was WannaCry, which was a target against supposedly a Ukrainian software company producing business software, which however was connected to many, many major companies worldwide and spread worldwide and maybe cost up to $10 billion worth of damage. So the damages associated with this type of attack that was first field tested through Korean actors is considerable. And the point is, it's not only economic damage and theft, although I'd like to pick up what the ambassadors have been saying, that there was recent reports that this year, in 2022 alone, North Korean actors supposedly stole between $650 and $1 billion worth of Bitcoin and cash them in, by the way. So that's part of it, because, you know, that's always the point with Bitcoin is when you cash it in. But they also drew attention to something else, which we in Europe already know. Sometimes it's not ransomware you're experiencing, it's ransom war. So very often, ransomware attacks are only political. They pretend to be criminal, they pretend to be about making money, but in point of fact, they're about disruption, denial, and just basically chaos. And in the North Korean case, it's been much more focused about making money, but that same infrastructure can be turned around. And there's always been a question of what case the mercenaries involved from different countries and similar. The point being is that we have become aware of that fact that these very dangerous attacks that South Korean officials have been dealing with for much longer than anybody else can also be used for only political purposes. And sometimes it's very difficult to discern what the difference is between those two. And regarding the recent attribution done by the government of South Korea, I warmly welcome this. We will probably talk more about norms going forward. As I mentioned, the new rules of the road globally in cyber are about soft law, about political agreements between actors that commit to call out bad behavior. There are no treaties in cyberspace, and the general opinion by the so-called like-minded group of liberal democracies is that treaties are counterproductive because they will be immediately broken and they will be cheated. So better we agree first what is bad behavior in cyberspace, and then we call it out together, rather than committing to a treaty that we know won't be worth the paper it's written on. And it's excellent that that Korea recently joined the group of like-minded group, which has been actively calling out this behavior. Japan also has been quite active recently, and also, of course, we have heard increasingly from European member states who have been impacted by also ransomware activities in the past. So I think I'd like to highlight the fact that in this new environment, speaking out is probably the most important thing everyone can do, and congratulations to the Korean government in joining. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you for especially pointing out this aspect that there is not only this economic incentive behind ransomware, but also the geopolitical, strategic incentive as well by governments that are cooperating closely with probably private entities and some hacking groups as well to conduct these ransomware attacks. Before we open the floor to the audience, I'd like to seize the opportunity to also ask one very brief question to all of the three speakers myself, probably in reverse order this time. So again, starting with Alexander Klimberg, I was wondering if you can very briefly outline how, in your opinion, now the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the entire new dynamics that we have seen since this war in cyberspace as well have changed and altered the security environment, not only in Europe and in the European Union, but also in an international setting.
It's been very interesting to follow the dialogue about cyber and the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Some people will say immediately, oh, it seems like cyber hasn't been used at all. And that's quite interesting because, as we've already heard, cyber attacks were, of course, used, and that's publicly known in the opening stages of the war against the Viasat satellites, which also had spillover effects on European enterprises. So using a malware called Acid Rain, they effectively deleted very often the satellite communication systems, and that directly impacted, for instance, wind turbines, thousands, I don't know exact number, but thousands of wind turbines in Germany, making them effectively uncontrollable. So this type of spillover effect is guaranteed to happen with cyber attacks. It's actually also the reason why, for instance, the US government was careful in using cyber attacks in the past, because it was constantly warned that it was not clear where these attacks would end up. So attacks did happen, but you can still argue that not more, but that actually it could have been worse. After all, the Ukraine experienced 2 significant cyber attacks before the current war, in both cases against its power grid, both cases putting hundreds of thousands of people in the dark. None of that happened this time. Why? And that gets you to the second order narrative, which is that we might have seen more or missed a cyber war right in front of us. So it's quite possible that a lot of cyber activity occurred that we in the public are not privy to. And the examples of where we know that's the case is that, for instance, the Russian communications during the invasion were severely disrupted. And those gives you a little indication that probably a lot was happening that we are not privy to. And when you ask what changes this has made to thinking in Europe and elsewhere, we heard before about the US concept of defend forward, which is sometimes known as persistent engagement. And I was asked to write a critical piece by the US Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which is a US Congress senator body, and they asked me to write a critical piece on the inadvertent effects on persistent engagement, this strategy that the Department of Defense developed. And the long story short is that it turns out that many things that the Americans were telling everybody else about hybrid conflict and the short step it took to actual war has been borne out. So one of the things I think the Europeans are now realizing and also trying to communicate to other parties, like for instance China, is that we are not ready to accept a consistent high level of cyber attacks anymore, because effectively this lowers the barrier for aggression on all sides, but also leads to mutual misunderstandings. It's quite clear that on the Russian side, for instance, they had no idea that there would be this type of pushback from the Europeans, but also from the United States, because they were probably led to believe, due to so-called passivity in cyberspace, that nothing was going to happen. So it's a question of sending appropriate signals. And for those people like myself who don't have any responsibility and only want to make sure that we don't end up in an accidental conflict, our main goal is to prevent what is known in diplomatic speak as inadvertent escalation or accidental conflict. And this is a perfect case of accidental conflict because signals are not being understood that are being sent from one government to the other consistently. So I think the signal that has now been being sent by everyone in the like-minded group is that we've reached the line on the hybrid conflict scenario, and that therefore every other actor should be wary of proceeding down this route.
Thank you very much, Alexander Klimberg, for these excellent remarks and comments. Ambassador Hong, based on your input before, I was wondering if you can very briefly just elaborate on a couple of your personal recommendations how to enhance cybersecurity policy and cybersecurity cooperation between the EU and South Korea.
You know, as I just mentioned, that the first strategy for us is that to, cooperate with like-minded countries. But the question is how. So that is very important. And then, after we are observing the Ukraine war, we realize that we are dangerously unprepared to, how to deal with, this kind of a space as a new, theater. So that really gives us a new challenge for us. So we want to discuss this issue with the EU, not only EU, but also the United States. So how we can cooperate in the area of space. So in terms of cyber attack. So that is one the good area. And then also secondly, we realized that one of the best lessons we learned from the Ukraine war is how we can prevent disinformation, misinformation, and fake news. So this is very important area, but no one can really tell you the answers. So we look up some various cases of the other like-minded countries, but we realized that Australia recently established the Counter-Disinformation Center in the branch of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we look very closely the case of Australia, and we try to discuss with how we can learn from their case. So that is another one I have to mention that. And then thirdly, we are looking very closely the Solarium report made by the U.S. Congress. We are reading from the Article 1 to the last article. The very, with marking pens. So we try to learn the lesson from the United States, the friends of the United States. So even though they made, the Solarium report, they still are, can prove that they can protect everything from the cyber attack. So we need kind of adaptation capability. And then we also need some creativity too. So this is an area we cannot hardly to try to solve ourselves. So that's why I just repeatedly say that we got to talk to each other, and then particularly EU. We need your help. So we are still in your good hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hong. Ambassador Reiterer, a very quick question also for you. What would you identify now in the European setting as one of the most pressing threats that in the European Union we are facing in the cyber realm that we need to prepare for now in order to be best equipped for these threats to might be implemented in the future?
Well, I think the European Union experienced the most cyber threats and attacks from Russia, actually. I think that's what we have been dealing with. There is in the EU strategic communication a unit which specifically deals with misinformation coming from Russia. It's a very interesting website, by the way. If you look at it, you find all the stories, and which are fake. Some of them obviously fake. Others, it's not so easy to figure out. And I think the important issue at the time was that the misinformation, the fake news, which came from Russia, went to the heart of the democratic system in the European Union because elections were attacked. Mm-hmm. And elections, that's the engine of democracy. So I think therefore it was an all-out effort to fight this kind of misinformation. However, Russia is an important part, but we also have to look in the Indo-Pacific. And therefore I have shown also in the short presentation the awareness that we cannot focus only on one source of problems, but there are other sources of problem. And in the Pacific, it is China, it is North Korea, and we have to add to this information issue also the technological issue, the whole problem of production lines and semiconductors. And 80% of high-end semiconductors are actually produced in Taiwan. Mm-hmm. So a Taiwan issue is a technological issue, but it's immediately a security issue. The next in line with high-end semiconductors is South Korea. The next is Japan, and then the United States. So I think there we have also a hardware issue where we have to be very much aware. The low end we produce ourselves. A car nowadays has 1,000 chips. 1,000, so it's a rolling computer basically, but they are not the important ones. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So combination of information and hardware, and that's not limited to Russia, that includes the Indo-Pacific, and there hopefully we have a good partner in Korea, and when everybody reads the book, then problem solved. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Ambassador. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as you probably have seen, I've noted down many questions myself, but I don't want to abuse my role. I saw a couple of hands already by several colleagues. So please, let's collect a couple of questions. First, the lady here in the front, then Valentin, please, and then here in the back. Thank you. Please state your name very briefly before you ask. Yeah,
okay, my name is Gertrude Oehlmark. I have two questions. One question for Mr. Kinberg. If you say it doesn't make sense to make any treaties because they are not worth the paper and you need to call out bad behavior, I really ask myself, maybe it's naive, but if we are having a government that doesn't take a treaty any serious, why on earth do we think that they will be bothered if they are called out for bad behavior? And I have one more question for Professor Reiterer. If it is so the elections are attacked and you correctly say they are the engine of the democracy, shouldn't we think about doing them analog instead of via computers. I mean, we did for centuries analog elections and it worked. And maybe I think they are less prone to attacks.
Thank you. Then here in the back.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Valentin Weber. I'm a research fellow with the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you all for the interesting presentation. My question is for Ambassador Hong. This year, South Korea issued their first independent cyber sanctions against North Korea. And North Korea is already one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. And so my question is, what kind of impact do you expect from those sanctions? And is it an impact? Is it just a signaling? Is it a change in behavior or other expected impact? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there was one more question in the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maria Lohmann. I'm an alumna of the Diplomatische Akademie Wien. And talking about accidental conflicts or provoked conflicts, I would like to know how you make sure that a cyber attack comes actually from a certain country and not that somebody is disguising actually the original point of attack.
Do you want to address the question to someone in specific or to the entire panel?
To the cybersecurity expert.
Okay, thank you.
We're all experts.
We're all experts.
I think in the human.
Okay, who would like to start?
Mm-hmm. I'll take it back to front then. Not because I'm the sole cybersecurity expert here. I think you just heard excellent contributions beforehand that say otherwise. The question, so there's thank you for excellent questions. First of all, how does attribution work in cyberspace? I think it's very important to think of it more as the balance of evidence and accumulation of evidence. So the legal term in English is preponderance of evidence. And so you only get to the position where it's likely or quite likely or very likely you'll never get 100%. So that's always a problem that we're dealing with, in particular when people like me talk to politicians who are used to talking about nuclear weapons and nuclear attribution. They are used to thinking, okay, if a missile is launched, we'll have 99.999, that's a little number, it's 5 nines, attribution where a missile is coming from. And they think the same applies in cyber, and it doesn't. And one of the first things that the US intelligence community managed to do when they established the Cyber National Intelligence Officer function was to explain what does high, low, medium confidence mean. And that's all you can do. So basically, there's always the chance of false flagging. There's always a chance of confusing, but you keep on minimizing it to the extent where basically you can say it's extremely unlikely that somebody else. But you can never completely exclude it. But there are so many different data points here. It's not 1 or 2 or 3. It's tens and hundreds and sometimes even more than that. So basically there's even cases where you can watch somebody typing into a keyboard the code that they're doing to attack you with. But you could still say, well, maybe somebody's hacked into that computer and you're right. So you only will have a very, very likely and never 100%. The first question actually on treaties is actually picks up, I think, on a very long-running discussion that we have had also in the OSCE 11, 12 years ago, which was, does calling out doing deterrence by attribution, which is what I advocated for at the time, and I was the only one, does it have any kind of point? Because they'll just shrug it off and they keep on doing it. And it was true. They did keep on doing it. But the thing about norms are cultural norms. They're like, one example, when you look into the literature, is a norm against slavery that took decades to develop. And not all norms succeed, by the way. For instance, there was a norm against alcohol in the 1920s that also failed, even though it was briefly successful. So norms are cultural approaches. They don't work like treaties, yes or no. You just get more and more people to agree. And what happens is is that, for instance, of the 11 norms that were agreed upon by the UN or endorsed by the UN General Assembly, so therefore have a very high level of importance, every single one of these norms was violated. But to quote a US State Department official, violations of the norm reinforce the norm, because by saying this happened and it's bad, we're calling it out. We're saying this is bad behavior, this is bad behavior. So the idea is that increases the general alliance of people that can say this is bad behavior. And frankly, I think we saw this a little bit in some of the reaction to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, where people basically who had been following this detailed, know all the bad behavior that was coming out of Russia in cyber terms, basically said, okay, this adds up, they've been planning this, they've been doing this, they've wanted this from the start. So therefore, it's a slow process of forming an alliance. And actually, this gets me to Valentin's point, because Valentin, this is the point. This is why I think the question, in respect to a colleague, is wrong, because your question is, why would North Korea care, since they're the most sanctioned nation on earth anyway? That's not the point. The point is that one is clearly establishing that they are part of a bad actor category. And also, Korea is establishing itself as being part of the good actor category. And that's how our alliances are formed. The practical effect, that's the question you're asking about, in all cases is very close to zero. The political effect is cumulative and real.
Thank you very much, Alexander Klimberg. Ambassador Hung.
Well, thank you so much. The Valentine gave us the very good questions, and then, I think I'm gonna repeat, what the Mr. Klimberg mentioned about the norms and and then you have to think that there's old school that the junction will not work. There's many people think that junction will really not work, but I must say that we have to the push back. So when they cross the border, lines, then we have to make sense out of it, and then let everybody knows this is against law. So that's very important one. So we are trying to maintain the rule of order, and then try to respect norms, even though we have less kind of the effect out of it. So that's I always emphasize that. Also, we have POE, the panel of experts. They are working very hard to check every some the misbehaviors and then their wrongdoings. So I think we can accumulate whatever you can, and then try to let everybody knows that North Korea is violating UN Security Council resolutions. That's very important, I think.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Reiterer, the question on election attacks.
Well, I think the analogous elections would not solve the problem. I think the attack which we have seen is more misinformation about information in the process and not so much about the technical part of the process. Remember the little problem in the United States, that somebody who thinks he has won the election, and Fox News was preaching it, and now they had to pay quite some money in an arrangement, because the machines were, of course, not the problem. So it's not the technical part; it is the information around which creates the problem. And perhaps also a word on the treaties and so on. Well, I think what one has to do, and what the European Union is trying to do, is to work on building governance. And I think there are some success stories. If I think in terms of GDPR, the general data protection, which has become a sort of world standard, with Korea joining in with the adequacy decision, Japan has joined in, other countries have joined in, and you're all aware of it, because when you go on the internet and you have to agree to all kinds of cookies, you are annoyed, but actually you should think, thank you very much, European Union, for protecting my data. It's a nuisance, but I can choose about the cookies. So that's part of GDPR, which now has to be enlarged. So this kind of effective governance building, which allows then the exchange of data, is important and creates facts on the ground, basically.
Thanks a lot for this excellent round of first questions. We have somewhat time for another round of questions. Yes, there is 1 and 2.
Thanks a lot for the exciting contributions to today's panel. My name is Philipp Myrtl. I'm myself a cybersecurity consultant working with organizations for the last 10 years now. According to a recent ISC Square study, 3.4 million skilled cybersecurity experts are currently needed globally. This was reflected in multiple conferences over the last couple of months, also in Austria and Germany. So my question towards the whole panel and to Ambassador Kui Hong in particular is if you can share any good practices on how South Korea made the shortage of skilled cybersecurity experts a political top priority that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we have a question over here.
Yes, thank you very much. Matthias Grabner from AI Austria. Great panel, really interesting topics. I have actually 2 questions, very short questions. The first one being, you mentioned the problem of attribution, and the Lazarus group was also mentioned. And just from a pure technical perspective, what they did in Malta and Bangladesh was perfect from a pure technical perspective. And it's such a tragedy that these young people that carry out these attacks are being used and extorted to use their creative energy and potential for these criminal activities. Ambassador Hong, you mentioned that these young people sometimes study abroad and to level up their skills. Doesn't this mean in the end that that we have to think about sanctioning individuals from North Korea trying to acquire those skills abroad? Mm-hmm. And the second very short question to Ambassador Reiterer is, you focused on the importance of collaboration between Europe and Korea. What efforts are being undertaken to tie Korea closer to the European Union's efforts in the Horizon Europe and Digital Europe programs? I think there's no association for the Horizon Europe program yet from the South Korean side. And in the Digital Europe program, South Korea is even exempted from participating in such critical areas as cybersecurity and quantum encryption and post-quantum security.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question? Otherwise, we can go directly into the round of answers. Probably start now with Ambassador Reiterer.
For once, I have good news. The Horizon, I think about 4 or 5 months ago, Korea finally decided to join, and it is an associated member of Horizon Europe. I'm very happy about it. The only thing I'm unhappy about it happened after I had left. Also, I had pushed them for 3.5 years, but it's okay. So I think that's the good news. And the other issue, what is being done to bring Korea closer, is called European Union Republic of Korea Digital Partnership. So this is the third digital partnership the European Union was concluding. It is a longish document of 15 pages, which I read in the train coming here to remind myself. A lot is administrative, setting up a ministerial committee, which is good, because as diplomats we know if you have ministerial meetings, then you have to produce deliverables. Otherwise, everybody gets excited and ministers are frustrated. So I think if this ministerial committee now is meeting on a regular basis, then we have to put heads together and find these deliverables. There is still some work to do. If I read here about headline cybersecurity and trust, that's by the way something where you should say a few words about arms control, your contribution to the book. Both sides are expected to explore ways to increase sharing of information on cybersecurity threats and so on. But that's not exactly the title of the book I have given. We should not continue to explore ways, but we should do something. So it is here, but it still needs a little bit of concretization, but we are on the good way. But let me misuse my position. Why don't you talk briefly about your idea in the books about how to build trust and have an arms control approach, which is very unusual.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity as well. Very, very briefly, I was trying to elaborate in this book some aspects of confidence building measures, of trust building measures that we have seen in arms control activities already in the past, in other means, in other ways, in ways of non-proliferation. And I thought of this aspect and that we can also draw some conclusions for changing an ever-increasing cyber arms environment and try to make this link between already existing frameworks, already existing parameters of arms control, and also apply them to this digital cyber world. So with that, I leave it as a very brief teaser, also for you probably to go ahead and take a little bit deeper look into the book if you're interested. But thank you very much, Ambassador Reiterer, for pointing out also this contribution, also this chapter of the book.
Right. Thank you very much for the wonderful questions posed by the floor. The first, the how we gonna produce the skillful, the young generation. We try to take the example from the Israel. So we wanna set up the best university like Korea University. Try to establish the kind of the Department of Cyber Warrior, something like that. So we're gonna hopefully provide a scholarship, and then they have to go to stay in the military for 7 years as a rank of a captain. But the problem is, after 7 years, they all get out of the army. So we cannot continue them to work for the country. And then the pension, they
have to earn some money.
Yeah, they have to earn some money, but their money is compared with the private market very lower. So can hardly keep them in the duties. So that's our dilemma. And then also we begin to understand that the bring all the stakeholders together, private sector and government and military and intelligence. But it is very difficult challenge for all of us. So how can we get some information and then harmonious work conditions, and then that is very important. The level that we have to challenge for for the future. So we are still working on, but this, I can hardly answer what should be the best way. So we'll probably discuss this issue with the European friends and colleagues. And then back to the Matthew's question about the young generations working for the overseas. You have to understand that they don't really send young students to the overseas countries because they are afraid of that those young students will defect to South Korea. So they never send them in their early age. But the problem is, they are still hired by some of the remote countries and as the game companies like that. So when they finish their work, they have to turn their duties by indulging into the hacking. So that's why we have to encourage all of our friends and the countries to observe UN Security Council Resolution 2397. So according to that, they have to defy them, they have to expel them, so they should not be there working as hackers. So we strongly ask our friends and the colleagues to work for to observe some UN Security Council resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex Klimberg, you have the honor and also the challenging position to have the last words again.
Well, I'll just add on to the previous comment, in particular regarding, first of all, the North Korean actors who, there is an open source report a while back about how some of them actually are forced to live in for instance, in Arvin in northern China and similar, and it's effectively slavery conditions. So in some cases, it might be extreme examples, but in some cases, it's not free. They're not living in the large life and traveling the world and similar. They're basically digital slaves, and that's the majority of people working in this, unfortunately. And regarding the professions component that you said about sanctioning individuals, I would prefer to take a different track, because there's been discussions, for instance, about also through the Wassenaar arrangement of trying to target malware, software, and cyber weapons. And these things are very difficult to pin down. In particular, anyone who really wants to can go and teach themselves how to hack. And don't forget that the efficiency of a hacker is always down to how poor the defense is, not how good the hacker is, right? So that's always a key issue. And that's why you have 11, 12, 13-year-olds who can pull off amazing hacks. Basically, that's the first thing. The second thing is that all these tools that you need as an incident responder, like we heard beforehand, as someone who does pen testing or a good hacker, they are available online for free. MPAC is something that you use to produce, for instance, malware all the time. It was created by the security community, and that's all you need to start a campaign. There is, of course, cybercrime software that's produced by bad actors that has intent for harm, but it's usually based on other instruments and tools that were actually created to do good. So I think it's more appropriate to think about it not in terms of skills, which you always can acquire, or even tools, because the tool is like a knife in this case. And we're not really trying to outlaw knives, we're trying to stop stabbing. And that's where we should start.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a big hand of applause to all of our four speakers. I would like to thank the Diplomatic Academy for hosting us, the Embassy of South Korea here in Austria for co-organizing the event with us, our entire team at the AIS. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard a lot of different possibilities, different threats in cyberspace. One of the things that we cannot do in cyberspace, and I think it's a good thing that we can't do it, is sit together and stand together with a glass of wine and continue the discussion. So please join me. We would like to warmly invite you to join us for a glass of wine in the room next door to also continue this enriching discussion. Thank you very much for your attendance, especially also the people who have joined online, and I wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you. Besten Dank.